Every Zelda fan knows the series has legendary dungeons, but here's what most don't realize. The blueprint that defines what makes a Zelda dungeon truly great wasn't perfected in Ocarina of Time's Water Temple, and it wasn't revolutionized in Breath of the Wild's Divine Beasts. The definitive formula was forged in 1991 in 16-bit glory when A Link to the Past crystallized dungeon design principles so perfect that Nintendo has been iterating on them for over 3 decades. This isn't nostalgia talking, this is design mastery that still influences games today. When A Link to the Past launched on the Super Nintendo, it didn't just build on the foundation laid by the original Legend of Zelda and Adventure of Link. It completely reimagined what a video game dungeon could be. The game introduced concepts that seem obvious now, but were revolutionary then. Dungeons that taught players through design rather than instruction. Items that functioned as both tools and keys. Boss battles that demanded pattern recognition and strategic thinking rather than simple button mashing. These weren't just good ideas, they became the DNA of the entire action-adventure genre. The genius begins with something deceptively simple, the game's structure. A Link to the Past features 12 major dungeons split between the Light World and Dark World. The first 3 dungeons, Eastern Palace, Desert Palace, and Tower of Hera, serve as the game's tutorial phase, though players at the time wouldn't have recognized it as such. Each dungeon introduces core concepts while steadily increasing complexity. The Eastern Palace teaches basic combat and switch puzzles. The Desert Palace expands on these ideas with the Power Glove, introducing the concept of items as environmental keys. Tower of Hera takes verticality seriously, spreading its challenges across multiple floors that must be navigated with the newly acquired Moon Pearl. But the real masterclass begins when Link enters the Dark World. This is where A Link to the Past's dungeon design philosophy fully reveals itself. The Dark Palace, Swamp Palace, Skull Woods, Thieves Town, Ice Palace, Misery Mire, Turtle Rock, and finally Ganon's Tower represent increasingly sophisticated puzzle boxes that demand mastery of every tool in Link's arsenal. Each dungeon is themed, not just aesthetically, but mechanically. The Ice Palace doesn't just look cold, its ice physics fundamentally change how Link moves and fights. Misery Mire doesn't just have a desert motif, its darkness mechanic and sprawling layout create genuine disorientation that thematic decoration alone couldn't achieve. Consider how the game handles progression. Unlike modern open-world titles that allow players to tackle challenges in any order, and unlike rigidly linear games that funnel players down a single path, A Link to the Past strikes a perfect balance. The game creates the illusion of freedom while subtly guiding players toward optimal progression. After obtaining the 3 pendants and pulling the Master Sword, the Dark World opens up. Technically, players can attempt several dungeons in varying orders, but the game's design naturally funnels most players toward the Dark Palace first. Why? Because it's positioned at the Pyramid of Power, the most prominent landmark in the Dark World, and because its difficulty curve assumes players have basic items. This guided non-linearity appears within individual dungeons too. Take the Skull Woods dungeon as an example. This dungeon is actually split across 8 separate entrances in the overworld, with only 4 leading to essential areas. The design encourages thorough exploration of the Lost Woods equivalent in the Dark World, rewarding players who investigate every suspicious tree or hole. Once inside, the dungeon's layout presents multiple paths forward, but careful observation reveals which routes lead to dead ends with treasure and which advance toward the boss. The game never tells players this explicitly. It teaches through visual language, enemy placement, and the logical structure of its puzzles. The puzzle design itself deserves particular attention. A Link to the Past's dungeons are built on a principle that seems simple, but requires extraordinary execution. Every room should teach something or test something previously taught. Early rooms in each dungeon introduce a new concept in a low-stakes environment. Maybe there's a new enemy type that can be studied safely, or a puzzle element that appears in isolation. Later rooms compound these concepts, combining multiple elements or adding pressure through combat or time limits. The final rooms before the boss synthesize everything the dungeon has taught, creating a final exam that feels challenging but fair, because players have been methodically prepared. The fire rod from the Skull Woods dungeon exemplifies this teaching philosophy. When players first acquire it, the immediate rooms feature simple torches that need lighting, straightforward use cases that establish the tool's basic function. As the dungeon continues, the fire rod becomes essential for puzzle solving, lighting specific torches in sequence, melting ice blocks, or defeating enemies vulnerable to fire. By the time players face Mothula, the dungeon's boss, players have internalized that the fire rod can light torches even during frantic combat. Mothula's arena features rotating fire barrier beams that can be controlled by lighting torches, forcing players to multitask between attacking the boss and manipulating the environment with their newest tool. This isn't difficulty through obscurity, it's difficulty through comprehensive teaching and testing. This item integration philosophy runs through every dungeon. The hook shot from the Swamp Palace doesn't just serve as a grappling tool, it becomes a combat option against shielded enemies, a traversal method across gaps, and a puzzle element that must be combined with other items. The Cane of Samaria from Misery Mire creates blocks that can be pushed onto switches, used as hookshot anchors, or even weaponized against enemies. The Cane of Byrona from the Ice Palace provides temporary invincibility but drains magic rapidly, teaching resource management. Each item expands Link's capabilities in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The game also employs brilliant backtracking incentives. After acquiring a new item, previously inaccessible areas of the overworld suddenly become explorable. That cave blocked by rocks can now be demolished with the Titan Mitt. That unreachable ledge can now be ascended with the hookshot. These aren't just collectible hunting grounds, they often contain heart pieces, bottles, or item upgrades that make subsequent dungeons more manageable. The game rewards thorough exploration without requiring it, a delicate balance that respects player choice while encouraging engagement. Boss design in A Link to the Past represents another evolutionary leap for the series. The original Legend of Zelda featured memorable bosses like Aquamentus and Gleeok, but these were largely pattern-based damage races. Link's Adventure introduced bosses with specific vulnerabilities and more complex patterns. A Link to the Past synthesized these approaches and elevated them. Every major boss has a distinct strategy, often involving the dungeon's signature item, and defeating them requires observation and adaptation rather than sheer persistence. Helmasaur King in the Dark Palace demonstrates this perfectly. The boss is protected by a mask that must be destroyed before its vulnerable weak point is exposed. Players can chip away at the mask with sword strikes, but the recently acquired hammer speeds up this process dramatically. Once the mask breaks, the creature's gem weak point is revealed, but only periodically as the boss moves unpredictably around the arena, charges at Link, and launches fireballs. Victory requires pattern recognition, spatial awareness, and precise timing. Mothula in Skull Woods creates a different kind of challenge. The flying moth boss circles the arena while spike traps rotate around the room's perimeter. The spike traps can be temporarily halted by lighting torches with the fire rod, but managing this while dodging Mothula's erratic flight patterns and damaging beam attacks creates an intense multitasking challenge. The boss isn't particularly durable, but the environmental hazards make landing clean hits difficult. This design philosophy, creating complexity through environmental interaction rather than inflated health pools, keeps boss fights engaging without feeling tedious. Blind the Thief in Thieves' Town introduces genuine surprise. The boss initially appears as a young woman who reveals herself as a monster after the first hit. In the battle's second phase, Blind's severed head flies around the room as a separate attacking entity while the body continues pursuing Link. The fight demands constant repositioning and target prioritization. Which threat is more immediate? Where is safe positioning? These split-second decisions create dynamic combat that feels fresh even on repeat playthroughs. Cold Star in the Ice Palace might seem straightforward, a giant eyeball frozen in ice that must be melted with the fire rod, but the execution creates memorable tension. The ice must be melted carefully while dodging falling ice chunks. Once freed, Cold Star splits into 3 eyes that move independently and fire freezing attacks. The slippery ice floor physics that characterized the entire dungeon return during the boss fight, making precise movement challenging. Every element of the dungeon feeds into the final confrontation. Vitreous in Misery Mire presents yet another variation. The boss is a massive eyeball surrounded by smaller eyeballs that detach and attack independently. Players must decide whether to eliminate the smaller threats first or focus damage on the main body. Both strategies work, but each creates different risk-reward scenarios. The smaller eyes can overwhelm Link quickly if ignored, but focusing on them extends the fight and increases the chance of mistakes. This strategic ambiguity respects player agency while maintaining challenge. Trinax in Turtle Rock serves as the penultimate test of everything learned. The three-headed dragon has a fire head, ice head, and central core. The fire head must be damaged with the ice rod, the ice head with the fire rod, and only after both are destroyed does the vulnerable core appear. The fight demands item switching, pattern memorization, and resource management across a protracted battle. It's a final exam that tests mechanical mastery and strategic thinking simultaneously. Aghanim appears twice, once at Hyrule Castle before the Dark World opens, and again atop Ganon's tower. Both fights use similar mechanics. Aghanim teleports around the room and launches magical projectiles that must be reflected back with the Master Sword or bug-catching net. The timing window is tight, and missing reflect sends dangerous magic careening around the arena. These fights feel like magical duels, transforming Link's sword into a tennis racket in the series' most famous volleys, until the Dead Man's Volley became a recurring Zelda boss mechanic. And then there's Ganon himself. The final battle takes place in a pyramid-shaped arena beneath Ganon's tower. Ganon teleports around the room, materializes as a bat form to charge at Link, spins his trident to deflect attacks, and throws blazing torches that light the room's edges on fire. To damage Ganon, players must strike with the Master Sword, then quickly follow up with a silver arrow to his vulnerable crystal form before he recovers. The battle demands mastery of combat fundamentals, pattern recognition, resource management with limited silver arrows, and environmental awareness as the arena gradually fills with flames. It's an intense culmination of every skill the game has taught. The influence of A Link to the Past's dungeon design on subsequent Zelda titles cannot be overstated. Ocarina of Time's transition to 3 dimensions preserved the core philosophy: themed dungeons with signature items, progressive teaching through increasingly complex puzzles, and boss battles that test understanding of new tools. The Forest Temple's bow, the Fire Temple's Megaton hammer, the Water Temple's long shot, the Shadow Temple's hover boots. Each dungeon introduces an item and builds puzzles around it, exactly as A Link to the Past established. Twilight Princess doubled down on this formula with dungeons like the Lakebed Temple and City in the Sky. Wind Waker iterated with dungeons like the Forbidden Woods and Earth Temple. Skyward Sword's Ancient Cistern and Sandship demonstrated that the formula remained viable even as the series experimented with motion controls and more linear design. Even Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, which deliberately subverted traditional dungeon design with divine beasts and temples that could be tackled in any order, still retained core elements: themed environments, signature abilities that unlock new traversal options, and boss encounters that test mastery of those abilities. The formula extends beyond the Zelda series. Countless action-adventure games borrowed A Link to the Past's structural DNA. The Darksiders series, Okami, Hyper Light Drifter, Crosscode, Death's Door, and Tunic all feature dungeon designs that echo A Link to the Past's principles: themed environments that teach through design, items that serve multiple functions, boss battles that test understanding rather than just reflexes. The 2019 Link's Awakening remake on Switch demonstrated that these principles remain compelling, even when applied to a game originally designed for the Game Boy. Players who grew up on modern Zelda titles discovered that 1993's Link's Awakening still felt fresh because it shared the same design lineage as A Link to the Past.
Perhaps most telling is how speedrunners interact with A Link to the Past. The game has been deconstructed frame by frame for over 30 years. Glitches have been discovered that allow sequence breaking, wall clipping, and arbitrary code execution. Yet even within speedrunning communities, there's widespread appreciation for the game's intended design. Categories exist that restrict major glitches specifically to experience the dungeons as designed. This speaks to the fundamental satisfaction of A Link to the Past's puzzle logic. Even when players can break the game, many choose not to because the intended experience is that well crafted. The game's dungeon design also benefits from its difficulty curve. A Link to the Past isn't punishingly hard, but it doesn't hold hands either. Dungeons expect players to pay attention, experiment with items, and learn from mistakes. When players get stuck, it's usually because they've overlooked something in the environment or haven't fully explored an item's capabilities. The solution is always present, never requiring knowledge from outside the game, and always achievable with the tools currently available. This creates genuine problem-solving satisfaction, rather than the frustration of arbitrary difficulty or the emptiness of solutions being handed out. The visual language supporting this design deserves recognition too. A Link to the Past's art direction uses color, pattern, and sprite design to communicate puzzle mechanics without text. Cracked walls look different from solid walls. Weak floors have distinct visual cues. Locked doors, bombable walls, hook-shottable objects, and liftable rocks all have consistent visual markers that train players to scan environments actively. This visual grammar became standard for the series and influenced how action-adventure games communicate interactive elements without intrusive UI. Sound design reinforces the teaching as well. The distinctive audio cue when a puzzle is solved correctly, the specific sound of a key appearing, the musical sting when a locked door opens, these audio rewards create positive feedback loops that encourage continued exploration and experimentation. The dungeon music shifts between tense and triumphant at key moments, subconsciously guiding player emotion through the experience. Even players who haven't touched A Link to the Past in decades can likely recall the distinctive sound of opening a chest or solving a puzzle room. The game's enemy design integrates seamlessly with dungeon philosophy. Enemies aren't randomly placed, they're positioned to teach combat techniques, guard valuable resources, or complicate puzzle solving. The Igor statues that come to life when approached teach players to scan rooms before rushing in. The Bimo statues with rotating laser eyes teach safe positioning and patience. The Wizrobes that teleport and cast spells teach projectile anticipation. Each enemy type introduces a tactical consideration that appears in increasingly complex combinations as dungeons progress. Trap design follows similar logic. Spike traps, floor spikes, moving walls, collapsing floors, fire jets, laser eyes, liftable rocks all have consistent visual markers that train players to scan environments actively. This visual grammar became standard for the series and influenced how action-adventure games communicate interactive elements without intrusive UI. The game's use of keys and locked doors creates another layer of puzzle solving. Small keys are consumable items found throughout dungeons, while the big key unlocks the boss chamber and special treasure chests. This system encourages thorough exploration. Missing a small key means backtracking to find it. Yet the game is generous with key placement, and careful players who explore methodically will naturally collect keys as they progress. The system creates a steady rhythm of exploration, puzzle solving, and forward progress that maintains momentum without feeling rushed. Even the game's map and compass items serve the design philosophy. Finding the map reveals the layout, showing which rooms have been visited and which remain unexplored. The compass indicates chest locations and the boss's position. These tools help players plan routes and prioritize exploration without completely eliminating the discovery element. Players still must figure out how to reach marked locations, but they have enough information to avoid aimless wandering. It's assistance without handholding, guidance without removing agency.
A Link to the Past's dungeons also excel at memorable moments, specific rooms or sequences that stick in players' minds decades later. The big chest room in the Skull Woods with multiple treasure chests and the fire rod. The confusing maze-like structure of Misery Meyer's first floor. The torch lighting puzzle in Ice Palace that requires careful observation of the correct sequence. Turtle Rock's laser eye hallway that demands perfect timing. These moments become touchstones in player memory, part of the shared experience that defines the game's legacy. The Dark World itself functions as a macro-level dungeon. The parallel dimension's corrupted landscape must be navigated carefully, with the magic mirror serving as a tool to switch between worlds. Certain locations are accessible only from specific light world positions, or only in bunny form without the moon pearl, or only after acquiring mobility items like the hookshot or hammer. This transforms the entire overworld into an interconnected puzzle that gradually unfolds as Link's capabilities expand. It's dungeon design philosophy applied to world design, creating a cohesive experience where every element reinforces the core gameplay loop. Ganon's tower synthesizes everything. This final dungeon requires navigating 4 separate paths, each themed after an element and guarded by a boss. Only after defeating all 4 bosses and collecting their crystals can Link access Aghanim and, subsequently, Ganon. The tower demands mastery of every item, every combat technique, and every puzzle-solving skill learned across the previous dungeons. It's a comprehensive final exam that feels appropriately climactic without being unfairly punishing. Players who've internalized the game's lessons will succeed. Those who've rushed through will struggle. This is difficulty through accumulated skill, not artificial barriers. What makes A Link to the Past's dungeon design timeless is that it respects player intelligence. The game assumes players can observe, learn, and adapt. It provides tools and situations, then trusts players to connect them. When modern game designers discuss intrinsic teaching, or environmental storytelling, or show don't tell, they're describing principles A Link to the Past perfected over 30 years ago. The game doesn't interrupt puzzles with tutorials. It doesn't mark every interactive object with glowing indicators. It doesn't provide quest markers pointing to the exact next objective. Instead, it creates logical spaces where solutions emerge from careful observation and experimentation. This is why A Link to the Past's dungeons still feel remarkable today. They're not remarkable because of technical achievement. Countless games have surpassed its graphics and sound. They're remarkable because the fundamental design is sound. Every room serves a purpose, every item has multiple functions, every challenge can be overcome with the tools provided, every boss teaches something valuable. The dungeons are intricate puzzle boxes that reveal their secrets to attentive players, creating satisfaction that transcends technological limitations. 33 years after release, A Link to the Past remains a masterclass in dungeon design. Its principles have been studied, imitated, and refined by generations of game designers. Its influence appears in countless titles across multiple genres. Its structure still serves as a blueprint for what makes exploration dungeons engaging, teaching designers that great levels educate through play rather than instruction, that items should multiply player capabilities rather than simply deal damage, and that boss battles should test understanding rather than endurance. The game proved that dungeons could be more than simple mazes with monsters. They could be sophisticated teaching tools that made players feel genuinely clever for solving them. That's the secret behind A Link to the Past's dungeon masterpiece. Respecting players enough to let them learn, experiment, and triumph through their own intelligence and observation. It's a lesson the industry is still learning, and a standard that few games have matched, let alone exceeded.